You're on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd first like to thank Pastor Jeff and John for giving me this opportunity.
Is it not on?
Oh, is it not?
Did I turn it off? I'm sorry, I blew it.
Real nice, Jeff.
I do things like
Invite
that.
her up.
I know, invite her up.
There you go.
My bad. You're welcome.
That sounds different. As you said, my name is Jorie, and first I'd like to thank both Pastor Jeff and John for giving me this opportunity to come and talk with you all today about Hank. To give you just a brief history on me, I never had a relationship with God. Even from when I was little, I never felt that connection that somebody else was there. You know, when other kids would pray, I'd be like, okay. When I went to college, I actually was very proud to call myself a pessimistic agnostic. Like, the only thing that kept me from being an atheist was that I didn't denounce other people having their own beliefs. I thought if that got you through life, then that was great. So, shoot forward to when, I found out that we were pregnant, which technically probably never should have happened to start with. So that in and of itself was kind of like a tap at the window. So, the pregnancy goes on, and about 6 months into it, we go in for an ultrasound, and the OBGYN says, well, I need to send you to a specialist. We're like, oh, why? And she said, well, it looks like there's something wrong with his brain, and we just want to send you to a specialist to make sure. So we're like, okay. So the specialist calls while we're on our way home, and it was right before a holiday, and they said, well, if you can get here right now, we can do you now, otherwise you have to wait a week. We're like, oh, no, we'll come now. So they do this big, long ultrasound, and we go into this room, my husband and I remember seeing a box of Kleenex and just thinking, I hope I don't need that box of Kleenex. And the doctor comes in, and he said, based on the ultrasound we just did, it looks like your child will have agenesis of his corpus callosum. Now, I'm a woman of science and medicine, and I know what the prefix A means. That means without. So his corpus callosum, that's the part that connects the two halves of your brain. So he's going to be born with either none of that or just very little. So he said, we don't know how severe his deficits will be, like whether he's autistic or learning disabilities, until he's born and he can display those for us. But we're going to get an MRI. I said, okay. So my husband and I go home devastated. We have to wait for the MRI. And I get to the MRI, and I'm on the table, and the technologist comes in, and he just innocently says, may I pray over you and your child? And I said, sure, we need all the help we can get. And in the back of my head, I thought, if it makes him feel better about doing his job, let him do that. So he prayed over Hank and I, and we had to wait like a week for the results, my husband and I. So we go in, and the nurse calls me back and sits me down, and she's taking my blood pressure, and she said, well, I just saw the report of your MRI on the fax machine. She goes, and it looks good. I said, don't do that. And she said, no, really, it looks good. And the doctor will tell you more about it. So they do another ultrasound, and my husband and I go back to that same room with the box of Kleenex, and he comes in, and the first thing the doctor says is, I hate to be wrong. I hate it. He said, but between the MRI that was done and the ultrasound we did today, his brain looks good. And that's one of those where if you hear a knock on the door, at least see who's there before you decide not to answer it. I didn't do that. I was still just, So, shoot forward to when he's born. He had some complications that before he was 48 hours old, he needed his first surgery. And during that surgery, his vocal cords were tapped. We didn't know that at the time. So my husband and I watch him in the hospital over the next few weeks. My husband notices he's having trouble breathing. So they send a specialist in who scopes Hank, and he said, well, his vocal cords aren't moving. And we're like, what does that mean? And he said, well, he can't protect his airway when he drinks milk. He's going to aspirate. So we kind of watched him for a little bit, and unfortunately he had to be intubated, and my husband and I are standing outside the room watching him be intubated. And the same doctor comes up with an older doctor next to him, and he said, this is Dr. Thompson, one of the best pediatric ENTs. And so they go in there while he's being intubated, and they come back out, and Dr. Thompson says, I had a surgery to my neck once, and they tapped part of my vocal cords. So I only have one working vocal cord. What are the chances you're going to get a doctor that has the same thing that just happened to your son, So inevitably, unfortunately, Hank had to have a tracheostomy and a G-tube. This is where it gets me. And they have to paralyze them for 48 hours afterwards. So I remember standing there and looking at him, and my husband's to my right, and I told my husband, I said, I have to pray. And he said, what? And I said, I need to pray. And he said, well, okay. And I said, what do I do? What do I say? It's like I'd never prayed for anything before and actually meant it. So I got down on my knees, and I told Pastor Jeff and John both, I said, there's a lot of ways you can pray. I said, standing up, sitting down, whichever. I said, on my knees. Felt like the only right place to be. And I told, my husband said, well, just talk to him. So I told God, I said, you can strike me deaf right now. I said, but don't deny the rest of the world hearing that beautiful sound. I heard it the day he was born, and I can live with that. I'm okay with that. But don't deny him the right to share it, and don't deny the world the right to hear it. And I meant every word. But in my heart, I was thinking, this is somebody that I said didn't exist. This is someone I denounced openly to other people. What are the chances? I mean, he's even going to hear me, let alone answer me. And we were told that it would take a year, at least, before we heard any sound come out of Hank. So we finally get to bring him home 2 months after he's been there, and within a couple weeks, I'm changing his diaper, and I'll never forget, because I heard a noise, and I was like, what's that? So I finished changing his diaper, and I hear the noise again. My husband, bless his heart, was in the shower, and he gets out, and I'm holding Hank like this. And I'm crying, and he said, what? And I said, it's so beautiful. I said, it's beautiful. So we go to see the ENT, and we tell him, we're so excited, we're like, he made noise. He's like, no, he didn't. I'm like, yes, he did. No, he really didn't. You think he made noise, but he didn't. It's common, but he's not. So we stuck to it. We said, no, we hear him. So he got a scope, because he was going to prove us wrong. And he called my husband over. He said, look in there. And he said, what do you see? My husband said, it's moving. And he said, it's moving. Something that should have taken a year took less than a month. And so time progresses, and some unfortunate events take place throughout, which are still testimonies, But the biggest testimony, not that at this point I didn't already have some kind of faith at this point, like, it's defied medical science, But Hank has what's called tracheal compression, which is basically where your trachea, when you inhale, kind of closes in on itself. Okay? We knew he had it. But the ENT took a picture of it, and he said, this is your son's trachea. And my husband and I are looking at it, and we're like, no, it's not. And he said, yes, it is. And we were looking at an opening that was about the size of the tip of a pen all the way through. That's what it looked like when he took a breath in. And he said, we need him to see a surgeon, because this needs to get fixed. So another huge story happens, but we're in the hospital waiting for the surgery. And I didn't tell Jeff or John this, but it was before Christmas. We were going to spend Christmas in the hospital. So the surgeon wants another CT of Hank's chest. And I was at work, and I'm talking to my husband. He said, well, the surgeon's here. He wants to talk to you. I said, okay. And he said something, bless his heart, Dr. Not Craig. He's South African, so he has this beautiful accent. But I couldn't understand him. And finally, he said, do you believe in miracles, Mom? And I said, what do you mean, do I believe in miracles? He said, well, I'm looking at one. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I thought they gave me the wrong scan. I thought they had pulled up the wrong child. He said, because your son's trachea has gone from 1 millimeter to 1 centimeter. He goes, I'm looking at a normal kid. He goes, it's a miracle. Merry Christmas. You get to go home. That's blowing the roof off. I mean, at no point now can I deny that my son is followed by God. It's just not possible. So I've gone from someone who said, there's nobody up there. I went from despair and anguish and no hope whatsoever to waking up every morning and knowing that he's there. Every time I hear that little boy giggle, I know he's there. Every time he says, I love you, Daddy, I love you, Mommy, I know he's there. And it gives me such a peace. And I know that all of you have already, that you all have faith, but what do you do with that? You share it. You have to. So, never lose faith in him, no matter what happens in your life. Never lose faith in him. Because I'm living proof that he'll never lose faith in you. And if that doesn't give you hope,